Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The question lingered in Saren Drake's mind as she sat at the far end of the C-130's cargo bay, the aircraft growling through rough air over Kandahar province. The men around her, Navy SEALs, built like granite and trained to act like it, were half asleep, leaning against rucks or helmets, their bodies tuned to turbulence and exhaustion. Everyone except her. Saren sat upright, motionless, hands clasped between her knees. Her gray eyes tracked every shadow moving along the fuselage, the flicker of a buckle, the sway of a rifle, the twitch of someone's boot as the plane dipped through a pocket of air. She didn't flinch. She just observed. That's what her file said she did. Observation. Analysis. But what her file didn't say was that she'd been trained to see what others ignored, to notice the rhythm of danger long before anyone else did. The loadmaster shouted over the engines, voice barely cutting through the roar. 30 minutes to drop. The men stirred to life. Weapons checks. Clicks and snaps echoed through the dim bay like mechanical prayer beads, each man going through the ritual he'd performed 1,000 times. Magazines locked, bolts racked, radios tested. For them it was muscle memory. For her it was theater. Saren's motions were quieter, slower. Her hands glided across her kit, touching each piece of equipment like she was reading Braille. Sidearm medkit comms, all in order. But beneath her vest, hidden from everyone's sight, was something that didn't belong to a mere intelligence analyst. Across from her, Chief Logan Cross caught her gaze. He looked away first. It had been happening more often since she joined their team 2 weeks ago. Men trained to dominate rooms suddenly unsure around her calm, unblinking stare. They didn't know what to make of her. She was an outsider. And in their world, outsiders didn't survive long. The SEAL commander, Lieutenant Commander Derek Harlan, moved down the aisle like the embodiment of order, tall, squared shoulders, calm under pressure. The kind of man whose confidence carried weight before he ever opened his mouth. He stopped in front of her, one hand gripping the overhead strap as the plane rolled slightly. "Drake." She looked up. "This is a direct-action raid," he said, voice raised over the engine noise. "You're here as an observer, not an operator. You remain with command element, provide intel if we ask for it. You don't engage unless my team is being overrun. Clear." "Crystal, sir," she said evenly. He waited for hesitation, for nerves, protest, something. When none came, he nodded once and moved on. Behind her, 2 of the younger SEALs whispered. "Bet $20 she freezes when the first round cracks." "No bet," the other said. "They always do." Saren didn't react, but she filed the voices away. The rhythm, the tone, the casual arrogance, details she'd learned to store like evidence. In her line of work, everything said in confidence became useful later. The truth was, she'd been hearing that kind of talk her entire career. Too fragile, too soft, too cautious. But what none of them understood was that the only thing more dangerous than someone underestimated is someone who's used to it. The loadmaster began the final checklist. The smell of fuel and dust filled the cargo bay. Somewhere deep inside the aircraft, a red light glowed, the prelude to war. Saren closed her eyes, but she wasn't praying. She was performing the ritual that kept her alive, the shedding of fear, the quiet acceptance that everything from this moment forward might be the last thing she ever did. Emotion was noise. Noise got you killed. When the ramp lowered, the cold morning air hit like a slap. The horizon ahead was painted gray and purple, the Carrick Range rolling out beneath them like a sleeping beast. Go, go, go. The SEALs spilled out in a practice flow, boots hitting packed earth, weapons up, scanning sectors. The choreography of professionals who'd done this too many times to think about it. Saren followed at the rear, her rifle slung, her eyes scanning the terrain. She wasn't part of their rhythm, but she wasn't out of step either, just parallel, watching, waiting. The compound lay in a shallow valley, ringed by terraced hills and mud brick walls that looked 100 years old. The plan was simple: breach, clear, capture a high-value Taliban commander believed to be operating out of the compound. Intel said 6 to 8 hostiles, light weapons, no major resistance. Intel. Saren almost smiled at the word. Intelligence was the world's most polite term for guesswork. As the team fanned out, her unease began to build. The air was too still. No roosters, no barking dogs, no sound of dawn waking up. Just silence. The kind that carried weight. "Something off," she murmured to Harlan over the radio. He gave her a quick, annoyed glance. "They're asleep, Drake. We're ahead of schedule. Relax." But her instincts screamed otherwise. Every nerve in her body was tuned to frequencies other people didn't feel. The kind you only learn after years of seeing what happens when you ignore that quiet voice. And then the world exploded. The ground lifted beneath her. The blast hit like a hammer to the chest, throwing dirt and men into the air. Someone screamed. The radio flooded with chaos, overlapping voices, medical calls, reports of casualties. The ambush had begun. A buried IED tore through the command element's approach path, not random, not lucky. Timed, measured, waiting for them. Then came the gunfire. Not from the compound, from the hills. Automatic bursts raked the valley, hammering the exposed Americans pinned in open ground. Muzzle flashes flickered like lightning among the rocks. They were trapped, the kill zone perfectly drawn. Harlan yelled for his men to regroup, but half the team was already down or cut off. Chief Cross dragged a wounded operator toward cover that didn't exist. The air was filled with dust, blood, and confusion. Saren dropped beside the command radio operator, scanning the horizon. Every movement became calculation: angles, distances, origin of fire. She could see the pattern. Whoever had planned this wasn't guessing. They'd studied American tactics, knew exactly how SEALs moved, how they reacted, where they'd take cover. "This was a setup," she said quietly. Harlan didn't hear her, or maybe he didn't want to. "Outpost Delta's under attack," the radio operator shouted, voice breaking. "They're taking heavy fire." Saren's stomach turned cold. The overwatch was gone. The kill zone had no eyes, no protection. They were alone. She looked up through the haze, her mind tracing the source of coordinated bursts. Every fifth flash came from a fortified position halfway up the hill, elevated, commanding perfect sightlines into the valley. That's where the enemy commander was, the brain of the ambush. "Cipher 7 to Heathen 6, she called calmly into her mic. "Multiple fighting positions, 30 to 40 hostiles. Request immediate air support." "Static then. Air assets 20 minutes out. Can you hold?" 20 minutes. She looked around, bodies on the ground, men screaming for medics. "No," she thought, "we can't." "Negative," she said, "we need it now." No reply. Just the sound of rounds tearing into dirt inches from her face. Harlan shouted something she didn't hear. Mason Hayes cursed and fired blind over a rock. Cross tried to rally what was left of the line, but the valley was a slaughterhouse. And that was when Saren made the decision that would change everything. She rose. Calmly, deliberately. Every head turned, men staring at her like she'd gone insane. Standing in a firefight was suicide. But she wasn't thinking about dying. She was thinking about geometry, about trajectories and breathing rhythms, about the rifle under her vest that wasn't supposed to exist. "Drake, get down," Harlan roared. She didn't. Her hand slipped behind her vest and pulled free a compact, black rifle, custom-built, perfectly balanced, a weapon meant for ghosts. She moved toward a low berm and dropped prone, her body settling into a position she knew better than her own heartbeat. The world narrowed to the scope's circle, wind, distance, shimmer. She found her first target, a PKM gunner laying down suppressive fire from the ridge. One breath. One squeeze. The suppressed crack barely rose above the chaos. The gunner dropped. The second target, the spotter beside him, went down before he could turn. No one noticed, not yet. Her pulse didn't change. Her breathing didn't rise. 3 seconds later, another burst of fire stopped midstream. Another shooter dead. "Jesus Christ," Hayes whispered. "Who is she?" No one answered. Because no one knew. Saren worked the field with machine precision, not suppressing, not spraying, just ending threats one by one. Every shot was an equation solved in motion. To her, this wasn't chaos, it was control. A two-man RPG team appeared on the ridge. She dropped the first before he shouldered the tube, then the second as he reached for it. 2 seconds, both down. The SEALs began to rally, disbelief mixing with adrenaline. They didn't understand how one woman, their so-called analyst, was erasing the enemy's entire command structure from 400 meters away. Even Harlan, crawling behind cover, couldn't look away. "Drake," he shouted, "what the hell are you?" She didn't answer. Her scope tracked the hillside, found the commander, the one giving orders. Moving now, desperate, she adjusted half a degree. A difficult shot, wind, distance, movement. She fired. The figure fell mid-step. And just like that, the gunfire collapsed. One by one, the shooting stopped. The valley fell into silence, broken only by the ringing in their ears and the hiss of burning dust. Saren stayed prone for a few more breaths, watching, confirming. Then she rose. No triumph, no relief, just focus. Harlan approached her cautiously, like she might vanish or explode. "What the hell was that?" She met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "That," she said quietly, "was me keeping your team alive, sir." The words hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke, no one moved. And for the first time, the men of SEAL Team Echo understood something they'd never admit out loud, that the most dangerous person in the room had been the one they'd ignored all along. He didn't say a word for the first 30 seconds. None of them did. The only sound in the valley was the soft hiss of dust settling over spent brass and broken men. Commander Harlan stood there, staring at her through the smoke, face streaked with grime, eyes wide with disbelief. The smell of cordite hung thick in the air. Every muscle in his body wanted to ask how, but even that word felt too small for what he'd just witnessed. Saren Drake reloaded in silence, smooth, methodical, as if the firefight hadn't just happened, as if 17 bodies didn't lie cooling in the dirt. Cross was the first to move. He limped toward her, a gash above his eyebrow leaking into his stubble. "We've got wounded," he rasped. "We need evac now." Saren's gaze swept the ridgeline once more. She wasn't done until she was sure, until there was no more movement, no more muzzle flash hiding in shadow. Then, and only then, she keyed her radio. Cipher 7 to Heathen 6, kill zone neutralized, immediate medevac required, coordinates transmitting. Static answered, then a distant voice. "Copy that, Cipher 7, dust off inbound." The SEALs began to move again, their bodies running on instinct, checking vitals, applying tourniquets, dragging the wounded into rough cover. The adrenaline still lived in their hands, but the silence between the bursts of motion told another story. Shock, a kind of disbelief that changed the way they looked at her. Mason Hayes, who'd mocked her on the flight, caught her eye as he passed, carrying a bleeding teammate. His face was pale. His mouth moved like he wanted to say thank you, but no sound came out. Harlan finally broke the silence. "How many?" She didn't look up. 17 confirmed, maybe 3 more. "In how many minutes?" She slotted her rifle into safe and checked the chamber. "Does it matter?" "Yes," he said quietly, "it matters." Saren's hands paused for half a second. Then she holstered her sidearm. "Long enough to save your men, sir. That's what should matter." Harlan didn't answer, because he knew she was right. Above them, the faint thump of rotors grew louder. The medevac was inbound, two Black Hawks and a Chinook riding the rising sun. The wind from the blades churned up dust and the scent of blood. As the wounded were lifted, Saren moved among them with quiet precision. She wasn't a medic, but she worked like one. Pressure on a wound here, a stabilizing strap there. No panic, no tremor, just calm. It unsettled them more than the shooting had. A woman who could end lives that easily should at least look shaken. But Saren Drake didn't shake. When the last litter was loaded, she was the final one to board. She paused at the ramp, scanning the horizon one last time, not for enemy movement, but for the invisible echo that always followed violence, the part no one else saw. Harlan's hand caught her arm before she stepped inside. It wasn't rough, just firm enough to make her stop. "What are you?" he asked. Her eyes met his, unblinking, the person they send when intelligence isn't enough. And then she was gone, swallowed by the dust and rotor wash. The helicopter's cabin was a study in silence. Men who'd trained for war sat staring into the middle distance, their thoughts replaying the last 30 minutes like a film they couldn't stop. The wounded moaned softly under morphine. The smell of hydraulic fluid and iron blood mixed with sweat and gun oil. Saren sat apart from them near the crew chief's station, her rifle across her knees. She began stripping it down, bolt carrier, charging handle, bore snake, cloth. Each motion clean, precise, the muscle memory of someone who'd done it thousands of times. Chief Cross eventually slid into the seat beside her, cradling his helmet in both hands. He didn't speak for a while, just watched her work. "My daughter wants to enlist," he said finally. "Marine Corps, she's 18 next month." Saren didn't look up. "I've been trying to talk her out of it," Cross went on. "Told her it's no place for women. Told her she'll never get the same respect, no matter how good she is." Saren's hands didn't stop. "You should stop lying to her," she said softly. He blinked. "What?" "That's what you're doing," she said, running the cloth down the barrel. "You're lying. You're telling her she can't when what you mean is you're afraid she can." Cross frowned, unsure whether to be offended or impressed. Saren finally looked up. Her eyes, those cold, storm-gray eyes, met his. "Some women can do this job better than most men. We just have to work twice as hard for half the credit." Cross let out a slow breath, nodding, but not entirely convinced. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "The real job, not the analyst thing." 8 years. He hesitated. "And how many?" Her gaze shifted to the window, to the endless desert stretching below. "Enough that I stopped counting," she said. "Not so many that I stopped remembering." The answer hit him harder than any gunshot. There was no pride in her voice, no regret either, just fact. "Every face, every shot you carry them," she added after a beat. "That's the price." The helicopter banked, the sun spilling through the open ramp in harsh golden light. Below, the base sprawled like an anthill of metal and motion. Tents, armored vehicles, the smell of fuel and heat. "Someone knew we were coming," she said quietly, almost to herself. Cross glanced over. "You think the op was compromised?" "I don't think," she murmured. "I know." They touched down hard. Medics rushed forward, shouting orders. The wounded went first, followed by the rest of the team. Saren stepped off last, her boots sinking into the hot dust of the landing zone. The air tasted of fuel and sunburn. Officers shouted for after-action reports, for explanations, for numbers that could make sense of the chaos. Saren ignored them. She moved through the confusion like a shadow, rifle case in hand, expression unreadable. She made it almost 50 meters toward the intel section, before a voice stopped her cold. "Captain Drake." The use of her rank froze her mid-step. Only a handful of people knew she still held it. She turned. A man in civilian clothes stood beside a black SUV that didn't belong on any forward base. Mid-50s, lean, eyes sharp as broken glass. "Agent Davenport," she said evenly. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. They moved between stacks of shipping containers, the only place where conversations like this ever happened. When they stopped, he faced her with hands in his pockets, the wind tugging at his jacket. "I had 16 intel feeds saying this was a clean target," he said. "Minimal resistance. Textbook raid." "It wasn't," she replied. "No," he said, "it was." He studied her for a long moment. "You violated your cover." Saren didn't flinch. 17 Americans are alive because I did. "You were there to observe," he said, voice rising. "To provide real-time intel, not conduct direct action." She tilted her head slightly. "Would you rather those 17 were Americans instead of hostiles?" He took a step closer, lowering his tone. "Don't twist this. You know how this works. Your job is to watch, not to reveal what you are." "My job," she said quietly, "is to keep Americans alive." He exhaled through his nose. "You're not a SEAL, you're not a Ranger. Hell, you're not even technically military anymore. You're an asset, and assets that go off-script get decommissioned." "Are you threatening me, Cole?" "I'm reminding you there are consequences." He took out a tablet, thumbed the screen, showing satellite captures of the valley. 17 KIA attributed to one shooter. "Do you realize what that looks like? Every man in that unit now knows something's off about you. They'll talk. They'll speculate. Eventually, someone will ask the right question." Saren said nothing. Her silence was a blade. Cole noticed the shift in her posture, the way her weight shifted to her back foot. It was the kind of small movement a killer makes when calculating possibilities. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You write the report," he said. "You state the enemy was degraded by preparatory fires, that you provided real-time intelligence enabling accurate response. You leave yourself out of it." "You want me to lie?" "I want you to maintain operational security. There's a difference." She looked at him, the faintest trace of something, maybe disgust, maybe pity, flickering in her eyes. "And if I refuse?" He smiled thinly. "Then you go back to Virginia, basement desk, satellite photos, empty desert for the rest of your career." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind kicked dust between them. Then Saren nodded once. "I'll write the report." "Good," Davenport said. He turned to leave but paused. "And Drake, next time you're embedded with a SEAL team, remember what your job is. Observation, analysis, support, not heroics." He walked away, leaving her standing alone between the containers. For the first time since the ambush, the silence felt heavy. She looked down at her hands, steady, unshaking, perfectly still. The hands that had saved 17 men. The hands that had ended 17 others. In the distance, the base kept moving, rotors thumping, generators droning, war grinding forward like a machine that never slept. And somewhere inside that noise, Saren Drake made a decision she didn't say out loud. The decision that would change everything that came next. Why was the room so cold? Concrete walls, no windows, just a single table bolted to the floor and a clock that hadn't ticked in years. The kind of room built for truth and for burying it. Saren Drake sat at one end, posture straight, face unreadable. Across from her sat Commander Derek Harlan, Chief Logan Cross, and 2 officers from the Joint Special Operations Directorate. Their faces were carved from fatigue and suspicion. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. They'd been in silence for nearly a minute when Harlan finally spoke. "The official report says the enemy positions were already softened by airstrikes before our arrival," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "It also says that Captain Drake provided real-time intelligence support that enabled effective targeting, that the mission, despite casualties, was a success." He leaned forward, folding his hands. But we all know that's not true, do we? Saren didn't answer. Harlan's voice dropped. We all saw what you did out there. We all saw the way you, he stopped himself, searching for the right word, fought. Chief Cross looked between them, jaw tight. The two JSOD officers watched silently, pens poised but unmoving, like vultures waiting for something to die. So, Harlan said, I'll ask one more time, Captain. Who do you actually work for? The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. She could have lied. It would have been easier. She'd already written the report Davenport wanted, filed it, signed it, made it clean. But these men deserved more than silence. They deserved the truth, even if the truth would disappear the moment it left her lips. Saren took a slow breath. I work for an organization that doesn't officially exist, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. We identify operations where conventional responses aren't possible or aren't allowed. We send in assets like me to resolve them quietly. One of the JSOD officers frowned. Resolve how? Direct action, Saren replied. Unacknowledged, unrecorded, deniable. The man scribbled something on his pad. So, assassins. Problem solvers, she corrected. Our targets are always verified threats to American lives or interests, but sometimes those threats hide behind political shields, diplomatic immunity, or within governments that protect them. When that happens, we go in, we fix it, and we vanish. Cross leaned back slowly. So you're one of those ghosts the teams whisper about. Saren's lips curved, but not in amusement. If they whisper, they've already heard too much. The room went silent again. Harlan's expression shifted, disbelief giving way to something closer to anger, then slowly to something like understanding. The ambush, he said quietly. It was too perfect. Someone tipped them off. Someone with access to our route, our comms, our timing. That wasn't bad luck. That was betrayal. She met his eyes. Yes. And you knew. I suspected, she said. Intel that neat never survives first contact with reality, but the op was greenlit before I could confirm. Harlan looked away, jaw flexing. So it was supposed to be a massacre. Yes, she said softly, and it almost was. He let out a breath that sounded like a curse. Until you decided to ruin someone's perfect plan. I decided, she said, not to let your men die for someone else's agenda. One of the JSOD officers slammed his pen down. This conversation never happened, he snapped. Do you understand that? What she just said doesn't leave this room. Cross glared at him. You'd rather bury it than fix it. The officer's expression didn't change. You think Congress wants to hear we've got rogue units conducting black ops under no flag and no oversight? Maybe they should, Cross said. No, Saren interrupted quietly. They shouldn't. They all turned to her. Because then they dismantle it, she said. And sometimes the only thing standing between a terrorist network and 1,000 dead civilians is one person you'll never read about. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The calm in it carried more conviction than shouting ever could. Harlan studied her, weighing the truth against the machinery of protocol grinding behind his eyes. You saved our lives, he said finally. I did my job, she answered. No, he said, shaking his head. You went far beyond that. You risked your cover, your mission, everything for a team that treated you like you didn't belong. Why? The question hung there, heavy, real. For the first time, Saren hesitated. She looked at Cross, at the bruise across his cheekbone, at the faint tremor in Harlan's fingers, where the adrenaline still hadn't fully burned out. Then she said it. Because that's what we do, she murmured. We keep Americans alive, even when they don't know we exist, even when they'd hate the way we do it. We live in the shadows so they can work in the light. No one spoke after that. One of the JSOD officers closed his notebook. Then this briefing never occurred, he said firmly. On record, Captain Drake provided real-time intelligence. Nothing more, nothing less. Everyone nodded. Harlan lingered as the others filed out. When the door finally closed, the two of them were alone. He sat back in his chair and studied her like a man trying to memorize something he knew he'd never see again. "For what it's worth," he said, "I was wrong about you, completely wrong." Saren looked down at her hands. "You weren't wrong," she said softly. "You just didn't know what you were looking at." Harlan smiled faintly, tiredly. "Is it lonely, being that person no one's supposed to know about?" She thought about it for a moment. The answer wasn't simple. "Sometimes," she said, "but loneliness is part of the job. You can't carry what we carry and still expect to belong anywhere." Harlan stood. "Will I see you again?" She rose too, gathering her folder. "Probably not. People like me don't stick around. We move, we adapt, we disappear." He nodded slowly. "Then let me say this while I can." She looked at him. "Thank you for my men, for keeping them alive." Saren gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're welcome, Commander." He hesitated. "Do me a favor." "What's that?" "Stop underestimating people based on faces or files," she said before he could speak. "The most dangerous ones are always the ones you never see coming." He laughed once quietly. "You took the words right out of my mouth." She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing softly down the corridor. The door closed behind her with the kind of finality that ends chapters and starts myths. Outside, the sun was blinding. It hit her like a flash grenade, white, hot, merciless. The base was alive again. Soldiers shouting, engines growling, the endless rhythm of a war that didn't pause for anyone. She walked through it unseen, just another uniform in a sea of them. But the glances followed her. Men who had seen what she could do looked away when she passed, as if meeting her eyes would mean remembering too much. By the time she reached the flight line, she was already fading into anonymity. That was the design. That was how ghosts survived. Still, as the wind kicked dust around her boots, a thought anchored itself deep in her chest, one that no handler, no superior, no commander could scrub away. They'd have all died if I hadn't acted. And yet, she'd still been reprimanded for it. That paradox had always been the weight she carried, the unbearable balance between doing what was right and doing what she was told. Duty versus conscience, orders versus life. Which mattered more? She didn't know anymore. That night the base quieted. The noise of machinery dulled, replaced by distant echoes of laughter and radio's bleeding static. Saren sat alone outside the intel hut, a metal mug of coffee cooling beside her. The stars above the desert were so sharp they looked carved from glass. She watched them and wondered how many other operators were out there right now, silent, unseen, doing the same kind of work under the same kind of silence. Maybe hundreds, maybe none. Her hands rested on the rifle case beside her. Inside was the weapon she wasn't supposed to have, the one that had saved 17 lives. Technically, it didn't exist either. She thought of the faces of the men she'd killed. Not their names, those she rarely learned, but their eyes, their last movements. They were burned into her memory like afterimages on film. She carried them all. That was the price of staying human, in a profession designed to erase humanity. A door opened behind her. Chief Cross stepped out holding 2 mugs. He offered one to her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Neither could I," he said. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "You think it ever gets easier?" "What?" "Living with it." Saren thought for a long time before answering. "It doesn't," she said, "but it gets quieter." They sat in silence after that, just 2 soldiers breathing the same cold desert air. When Cross finally stood to go, he looked down at her. "You'll be gone by morning, won't you?" She nodded once. Figures, he said. Guess legends don't stick around for breakfast. She smiled faintly. Neither do ghosts. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone beneath the stars. For a long while, Saren just sat there, tracing the constellations with her eyes, feeling the night settle around her like a familiar cloak. Tomorrow she'd disappear again. Another assignment, another country, another name. That was the life she'd chosen, or maybe the life that had chosen her. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the discipline and the detachment, a quiet truth pulsed like a heartbeat. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the mission feel wrong before it even began? Saren Drake had learned to trust that feeling, the faint static beneath her skin, the kind that told her something unseen had already shifted. She was standing in the hangar of an airbase that officially didn't exist, staring at a wall map of North Africa. Lines of red and blue light crisscrossed the continent like veins. Every one of them represented an operation, a risk, a life on the line. Her name wasn't Saren Drake anymore. Not here. Not on paper. In this life, she was Captain Rains, attached to a NATO joint intelligence program tracking weapons shipments through the Sahel. That was the cover story. The truth was narrower, sharper. A kill mission wrapped in diplomacy. She'd been told the target was an arms broker named Karim Said, ex-intelligence, turned contractor, now supplying heavy ordnance to extremist groups in Mali. The kind of man who never got close to justice because he'd built walls of money and politics around himself. And that was why they'd sent her. Not to observe. Not to record. To remove. The problem was, Saren could already feel the distance between the briefing and reality. The mission package was too neat. Too curated. She'd seen this pattern before. The same polished intelligence that had gotten 17 Americans killed in Kandahar province. And the same names attached to the clearance chain. Cole Davenport. The man who told her to stay in line. The man who'd buried the truth of the ambush. Saren closed the folder, her jaw tightening. Someone was using her again. And this time, she intended to find out who. That night, she flew into Mali under a false diplomatic manifest. Her hair was a different color now, darker, longer, cut to soften the edges of her face, the small details that made ghosts disappear. She arrived at a NATO logistics compound outside Gao just before midnight. The base smelled like hot metal and diesel, the air humming with the vibration of distant generators. Inside, she met her liaison, a young French intelligence officer named Lieutenant Pierre Morel. He looked barely old enough to shave, let alone manage an operation. "Captain Rains," he said in careful English, shaking her hand. "We have your quarters ready. You will find your equipment inside." His eyes flicked toward the small black case she carried, the one that never left her side. He didn't ask about it. Smart boy. "Thank you," she said. As they walked through the narrow corridors, she studied him in silence. The way his hand never strayed far from his sidearm, the slight tremor when he mentioned the local militia. He was new. Green. And he was afraid. That, more than anything, confirmed her suspicion. This wasn't a stable operation. When they reached her quarters, a small room with a metal cot and a single desk, Morel lingered at the door. "If I may ask, Captain," he said, hesitating, "why send you?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He flushed slightly. "I mean, this is a logistical hub, not a combat zone." She smiled faintly. Maybe someone forgot to tell the enemy. He didn't know how to respond, so he nodded awkwardly and left. When the door closed, Saren exhaled slowly and sat on the cot. She opened the black case. Inside lay her weapon, the same custom rifle that had ended the ambush in Kandahar. She cleaned it so many times she could do it blind. She ran her hand along the stock, feeling the faint groove where her grip had worn the finish smooth. It was more than a tool. It was truth. And every truth had a price. The first 2 days went quietly, too quietly. Saren embedded with the French unit stationed near Gao, running briefings, analyzing movement patterns of local cells. She did her job. Listened, watched, waited. But everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her. Men who looked away too quickly. Documents that arrived with the wrong stamps. Data that didn't align. By the third night, she had proof. A convoy manifest she'd requested from headquarters showed weapons moving north toward the desert. But when she cross-checked the satellite data, the trucks never existed. False coordinates. Fabricated records. Someone inside her own chain of command was running ghost shipments. And someone else wanted her to take the blame. She shut her laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. The hum matched the rhythm of her thoughts. This was bigger than Karim Said. This was a cover operation, one designed not to expose him but to protect him. And she was the weapon pointed at the wrong target. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion creeping in. Every time she thought she understood the game, someone changed the board. 2 days later, her chance came. Morel brought news that the target had been sighted at a private airfield outside Menaka. Small security detail, he said. Local militia, maybe half a dozen. Saren studied the imagery. The terrain was flat, exposed. Perfect for surveillance. And perfect for a trap. Still she went. Because hesitation was death. They rolled out in a two-vehicle convoy under the cover of pre-dawn haze. The sand shimmered pale blue under the rising light. The plan was simple. Confirm presence, call in support, extract. But simplicity was a liar. Halfway to the target site, the lead vehicle's comms went dead. Then, the rear truck's engine sputtered to a halt. Saren knew instantly what it meant. EMP pulse, short range, localized. They were being boxed in. Out, she ordered. The soldiers scrambled, weapons up. But before anyone could react, gunfire erupted from the dunes, precise, disciplined bursts. The first rounds took the driver. The second clipped Morel's shoulder, spinning him to the dirt. Saren dove behind the truck, pulling him to cover. Stay down. He was bleeding fast, panic flooding his eyes. She peeked over the hood, scanning. The shooters weren't militia. Too organized. Too clean. She recognized the weapon signatures instantly. American. Her stomach turned cold. This wasn't a local ambush. It was an extraction. For her. Pierre, she said, voice steady. Who else knew our route? And no one, he stammered. Just command. Why? Because someone in command wanted her gone. She grabbed her rifle case, popped it open, and assembled the weapon in seconds. The metallic clicks cut through the chaos like a heartbeat. 3 shooters on the ridge, 2 more flanking left. She moved fast, precise, no wasted motion. The first man dropped before he realized she'd spotted him. The second tried to relocate. She cut him down mid-stride. By the time the fifth fell, the desert had gone silent again. Morel stared at her in shock, his hand clamped over his wound. You're not just intelligence, are you? She didn't answer. Instead, she reloaded, eyes sweeping the horizon. A dust plume rose in the distance, 2 vehicles approaching. Extraction maybe, or pursuit. Can you walk? She asked. He nodded weakly. Then move. They made it to a ridge, overlooking the airfield just as the sun climbed. Through her scope, Saren saw movement near a hangar, armed men unloading crates, and at the center of it all, Karim Said. Her target. He was alive, laughing, surrounded by men who shouldn't have known she was coming. Her breath stilled. Someone had fed him her arrival. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Then she saw something else. A tall figure in civilian clothes stepping from a vehicle, shaking Saeed's hand. Cole Davenport. Her handler. Her blood went cold. So that was it. The man who'd ordered her to lie, who'd buried the truth of the Kandahar ambush, was now standing beside the terrorist she'd been sent to eliminate. The betrayal was complete. The decision came as naturally as breathing. She steadied her scope, exhaled, and drew a perfect bead on Davenport's head. One squeeze, one ending. But she didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Because killing him here would solve nothing. It would only prove his narrative, that she was the weapon he'd built, incapable of control. No. She needed to know why. She needed to know who he answered to. Pierre, she said quietly, eyes still in the scope, you ever wondered what happens when you discover the wrong truth? He frowned weakly. What do you mean? You stop being the hunter, she said, and you start being the target. She pulled back from the scope, breaking down the rifle with the same calm she'd built it. They needed to disappear, and fast. By the time the second convoy reached the ambush site, Saren and Morel were gone. The bodies were there, the footprints led nowhere. The desert had swallowed them whole. That night, somewhere deep in the dunes, Saren sat by a dying campfire, her rifle beside her, her face streaked with dust. Morel slept fitfully beside her, his arm bandaged with strips of her scarf. She watched the stars, thinking of the chain that had led her here, the lies, the files, the orders. Someone had set her up. Someone had tried to erase her. And the only person she trusted enough to ask for help was the same man she'd saved in that valley months ago. Commander Derek Harlan. She'd sworn never to contact him again. Now she had no choice. Because if Davenport had turned, if the system itself was compromised, then she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to expose the lie behind every mission she'd ever carried out. The fire cracked once, sparks vanishing into the night. Saren whispered into the darkness, more to herself than to anyone else. Every shadow leaves a trail, she said, even the ones that think they don't. And with that she made her plan. To go dark. To vanish again. And to come back not as an asset, but as a reckoning. Why did he answer a call that shouldn't have existed? The encrypted satellite line on Commander Derek Harlan's desk flashed once, then again, a pulse from nowhere. He hesitated before picking it up. No one was supposed to have this frequency, not anymore. Commander Harlan, he said cautiously. A pause, then a voice, low and calm, came through the static. Don't say my name, don't trace this signal, just listen. The sound of it froze him. He hadn't heard that voice since the debrief, since the woman who'd saved his team disappeared into classified legend. Drake, he whispered. Don't, she said sharply. You're not alone, are you? He glanced at the security camera blinking red in the corner of his office. He rose, crossed the room, and flipped the circuit breaker that powered the surveillance system. The lights flickered. The red light died. Okay, he said, lowering his voice. You've got 30 seconds before command wonders why I went dark. Talk. Her breath came faintly over the line. They tried to kill me, Commander. The words dropped like lead. Where? Molly, my operation was compromised. I was set up. The target was a cover. The ambush wasn't militia, it was American, my own. He straightened. Jesus Christ, are you hurt? No, but they won't stop there. Someone's cleaning house. Who? Cole Davenport, she said quietly, and whoever he answers to. Harlan felt a cold pulse of anger beneath his ribs. He's CIA liaison to JSOD. He can't authorize hits on his own. He doesn't have to, she said. All he has to do is point the gun and let the machine pull the trigger. Silence, the kind that carried both fear and clarity. "What do you need?" Harlan asked. "Proof," she said. "Files, communications, anything that links Davenport's operations to internal funding streams. You still have access." "That's not easy," he said. "Nothing worth doing ever is." A faint edge entered her voice. "You told me once to stop underestimating people based on files. I'm asking you to prove you meant it." Harlan rubbed his temple. "You realize what you're asking, right? If I dig into that, I'm done. My career may be worse." "Then make it worth something," she said. "Because if we don't stop them now, it won't just be me they erase." The line crackled, interference from somewhere. She was moving, probably switching transmitters. "Drake," he said quickly, "where are you?" Her answer came faint, distorted. "Off the map. Stay that way, too." Then the line went dead. Harlan sat back in the dark, staring at the silent phone. His pulse hammered against his ribs. He'd spent years believing he understood how the system worked, that even its uglier parts served some greater order. But Saren Drake had just cracked that illusion. And the worst part was, he believed her. He always had. 3,000 miles away, Saren was already on the move. She ditched the jeep near the Algerian border, scavenged a dirt bike from a mining outpost, and ridden through the desert until her hands blistered on the grips. Now she crouched in a burned-out ruin, an old French fort swallowed by sand. The walls were cracked, sun-bleached, and filled with ghosts of soldiers long gone. It was a fitting place to hide. Lieutenant Morel lay on a blanket nearby, his arm bandaged and his face gray with pain. He was alive, but barely. "Water," he rasped. She handed him her canteen. He drank greedily, coughing after each swallow. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally. "You could have left me there." She didn't answer at first, then quietly, "Because once someone helped me when they didn't have to." He studied her in the flicker of the lantern light. "You don't trust anyone, do you?" "Trust gets you killed," she said. "Belief keeps you moving." He frowned. "Belief in what?" She looked past him, toward the dunes stretching endlessly beyond the broken walls. "That truth still matters, even when it's buried." By the third day, Morel could walk again. The wound had scabbed, though infection lingered. They moved at night now, ghosts beneath a sky so full of stars it looked like it could collapse under its own light. Saren's thoughts kept circling back to Harlan. Would he take the risk? Would he dig deep enough before they noticed? Her gut said yes. He wasn't built to look away anymore. Back in Washington, Harlan sat in his office with the door locked, staring at the classified intranet feed he wasn't supposed to access. He typed carefully, tracing Davenport's authorizations through layers of code names and false contracts. Most of it was routine: logistics budgets, training operations, field asset funding. Then he found it. A line item under a dummy corporation listed as Redcliffe Dynamics. Payments routed through the same black fund that had financed Saren Drake's missions. And one of the recipient accounts matched a shell company tied to Karim Said. He sat back, the realization hitting like a fist. Davenport wasn't hunting terrorists. He was arming them. Selling weapons through covert supply lines, then cleaning up loose ends by eliminating anyone who got too close, including Saren. He copied the files to an encrypted drive, wiped the access log, and shut down the terminal. But he'd waited too long. A shadow fell across his doorway. "Working late, Commander." Harlan looked up. Davenport stood there, smiling. That same measured calm he'd seen 100 times during briefings. "Couldn't sleep," Harlan said. Davenport stepped in, closing the door behind him. "Good. Saves me the trouble of finding you later." There was something in his tone that chilled the air. Harlan forced a smile. "What's this about?" "Drake," Davenport said simply. "Or whatever she's calling herself now. You've had contact." No, Harlan said. Why would I? Davenport studied him for a long moment. Then, softly, because you don't lie well, Commander. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. She's dangerous, you know. People like her start believing they can rewrite the rules. That's how good soldiers become liabilities. Harlan kept his expression neutral. You mean like patriots? Davenport smiled thinly. Patriots are useful until they forget who writes their orders. He turned. If she contacts you again, you'll let me know, immediately. Harlan met his eyes. And if I do? Davenport's smile faded. Then we'll assume you've become part of her problem set. He left without another word. When the door clicked shut, Harlan exhaled the breath he'd been holding. He was in, whether he wanted to be or not. That night, he transferred the files through a dead-drop channel once used for counterintel operations, one only a handful of Black Ops analysts still remembered. Saren would know it. It was the same route she'd used to send him her coordinates in Kandahar province. He encrypted the packet with a single phrase, for the living to stay alive. Then he sent it. Saren received the transmission 2 days later in a safe house outside Tamanrasset, a dusty, forgotten town where nobody asked questions. She read the contents 3 times before the truth sank in. It wasn't just Davenport. It was bigger. The entire chain of command above him, a web of contractors, politicians, and covert financiers, all feeding the same machine. War for profit. Terror manufactured and managed like currency. And she'd been part of it. The realization hit her harder than any bullet. All those missions, all those kills, every target she'd ever neutralized because someone told her they were a threat. How many of them were simply inconvenient to someone's ledger? Her pulse slowed steady cold. She closed the laptop, locked the data drive inside her rifle case, and sat in the dim room, staring at nothing. Morel entered quietly. What did you find? Enough to start a war, she said. He hesitated. Then what do we do? She looked at him. We survived long enough to tell the truth. That same night, someone knocked on the door. 3 short taps, a pause, 2 more. An old field code, one used by American units. Saren motioned for Morel to take cover. She approached the door silently, her sidearm raised. Who is it? She called. A voice answered, friendly, bearing ghosts. She froze. It was a code phrase, one only she and one other person had ever used. Harlan. She opened the door. He stood there, dusty from travel, eyes tired but alive. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, You were right. She gestured him in. When the door shut, the past and the present collided in the silence between them. You shouldn't have come, she said. I had to, he replied. They know you're alive. Davenport's moving fast. He's got full authorization to neutralize you. Authorization, she repeated. That's the word they use now instead of murder. He didn't argue. I brought you the files, he said, setting a small encrypted drive on the table. Everything I could find. It's dirty, Drake, deep dirty. This doesn't stop at Davenport. It goes straight to Capitol Hill. She looked at him. Then we can't fight it from here. He nodded. You have a plan. Something like one, she said, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. Outside, thunder rolled over the desert, rare, distant, like a warning. Saren picked up the drive and pocketed it. If I go down, this goes public. Every name, every dollar, every lie. They built this machine thinking no one would ever challenge it. And you, Harlan asked. She met his gaze. I'm not a ghost anymore, Commander. I'm what comes after. Later, when he'd gone to rest, Saren stepped outside into the warm night air. The storm was still gathering on the horizon, faint flashes of lightning tracing the sky. She stood there in silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her shoulders. The war had changed shape, no longer fought in valleys or compounds, but in data, in lies, in silence. And she was about to drag it into the light. For once, the ghosts were coming for the living. She looked toward the distant storm and whispered to the wind, her voice barely audible. "Let them come." Why did the sky look calm when everything beneath it was falling apart? The horizon stretched endless, black dunes under a storm-heavy sky. Lightning flickered in the distance like the slow flash of artillery. Saren Drake stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the desert, her rifle slung across her shoulder, her hair pulled back tight. Behind her, inside the safe house, Commander Harlan sat hunched over a table littered with maps and hard drives. His face was shadowed by the lantern light. They hadn't slept in 20 hours. Every minute since his arrival had been spent encrypting, decoding, and piecing together fragments of the truth. A mosaic of corruption that went higher than either of them had imagined. When she stepped back inside, the room smelled like sand, coffee, and tension. "Anything new?" she asked. Harlan rubbed his eyes. Two of the accounts traced to a shell company in D.C. called Kahlo Systems. They've been laundering defense funds for years, fronting as logistics contractors. "Who's the registered owner?" He hesitated. "A senator's aide, Henry Lowell." Saren frowned. "Lowell sits on the Armed Services Committee." "Exactly," Harlan said. "He approves black budget allocations, the ones Davenport been funneling. So the same people who sign the checks for our missions are profiting off the chaos they fund." Harlan nodded grimly. "That's the machine." Saren stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. "We can't fight it here. We need a way to expose this where they can't bury it." "Even if we leak it," Harlan said, "they'll discredit it before sunrise. Classified intel, rogue operators, fake footage, they've done it before." "Then we don't leak data," she said. "We show them proof they can't spin." Harlan frowned. "Like what?" "Like Davenport himself," she said. "We find him. We bring him in alive and make him talk on record." "Drake, that's suicide." She met his gaze. "No, that's justice." By dawn, they were already on the move. Harlan drove, the old Land Cruiser roaring across the cracked desert road. Saren navigated from the passenger seat, flipping between satellite overlays on a small tablet. "Intel says Davenport's heading east," she said. "He's got a convoy moving through Niger, probably heading toward the coast. If he gets out of Africa, we lose him." "You really think he's traveling in the open?" "He's arrogant," she said, "and he thinks I'm dead." Harlan smirked faintly. "That might be the first advantage we've had." The road narrowed into rocky passes. Dust clouded behind them. Neither spoke for a while. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was heavy with purpose. Finally, Harlan said, "You ever think about what happens after this, if we survive?" Saren's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Survival isn't the plan." He glanced at her. "You don't mean that." "I mean exactly that," she said. "People like me don't retire. We just stop showing up on manifests." "Maybe that's the problem," he said quietly. "You've been fighting ghosts so long you forgot you're still human." She looked at him then, not angry, just tired. "Humanity doesn't win wars, Commander. Clarity does." He shook his head. "You sound like them." The words landed harder than he expected. She looked away, her voice low. "Then maybe that's what scares me most." By midday, they reached the outskirts of Agadez, a smuggler's hub that looked like a mirage built from rust and dust. The streets buzzed with traders, armed escorts, and black market runners. Saren moved like she'd been born to vanish. A scarf hid half her face, her steps deliberate but unremarkable. Harlan followed, carrying a small case containing the drives. They found a contact in the back of a mechanic's shop. A wiry woman named Layla, ex-French intelligence turned broker. Layla recognized Saren immediately. "I heard you were dead." Not yet, Saren said. Layla grinned. Give it time, what do you need? A route to Dakar, Saren said. Low visibility, no military lanes. Layla nodded slowly. You planning to chase someone? Something like that. Layla typed into her tablet, eyes darting between screens. You're being hunted, you know. I intercepted chatter 2 nights ago. American signals, someone, offering 6 figures for your coordinates. Saren's jaw tensed. That's cheap. Layla looked up. And they've already sent a team. 2, maybe 3. One in Niamey, another moving from Gao. You've got 48 hours before the sky falls. Harlan exhaled slowly. So what's the good news? Layla smiled. You still have me, and I like lost causes. She handed Saren a folded map. Route marked in red. There's a refuel stop near Tamia. After that, you're ghosts. Saren nodded. You were always the best. Correction, Layla said. You trained me. As they turned to leave, Layla's voice followed softly. Be careful, Drake. The ones who built the shadows don't forgive the ones who walk out of them. That night, they stopped near an abandoned radio tower on the edge of the Sahara. The stars looked close enough to touch. Harlan sat by the fire, flipping through an old field notebook. Saren cleaned her rifle, the metal glinting in the flames. He broke the silence first. When we make it to Dakar, what then? We upload everything, she said. Unedited, all of it. Names, transfers, missions. And if it burns everything down? Then maybe it's time it burns, she said. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You really believe the truth can fix any of this? She shook her head. No, but it can stop the next version of me. Her voice softened, almost too quiet to hear. I don't want anyone else to become what I became. He didn't answer, because there wasn't one. They sat in silence, 2 soldiers watching the fire die, one haunted by orders, the other by obedience. Just before dawn, the attack came. It started with the faint whine of a drone overhead. Then the world exploded. A missile struck the dunes 20 meters away, shattering sand into molten glass. Saren rolled, dragging Harlan behind a rock outcrop as another blast hit the tower, tearing it apart. Move, she shouted. They sprinted through the smoke as bullets whipped past. Black silhouettes crested the ridge, not locals. These were professionals. American gear, NVG's thermal optics. Task Force. Harlan fired back, covering her flank. Saren dropped to one knee, lined up her scope, and cut down the lead assaulter before he could relay their position. More gunfire answered. The air burned with tracer rounds. Harlan reloaded, teeth clenched. You said they'd wait until Dakar. They got impatient. A bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She fell, grunting, but rolled to cover. Blood seeped through her sleeve. Harlan reached her side, pressing a hand over the wound. You're hit. I've had worse, she hissed. Another explosion thundered nearby, a fuel drum igniting in the firelight. They were surrounded. Saren looked at him, calm, focused, utterly still inside the chaos. We can't hold them here. Then where? Downhill, the dunes. They moved as one, a practiced rhythm that came from survival, not training. Rounds snapped through the air as they slid down the slope, sand spraying under their boots. At the bottom, Saren turned and fired 3 controlled bursts, precise, surgical. 3 silhouettes fell, the rest hesitated. Then over the comms, a familiar voice cut through the static. Stand down, Drake. Cole Davenport. The calm in his tone was almost intimate. This doesn't have to end like this, he said. You and Harlan surrender now, and maybe I can make this disappear. Saren keyed her radio, her breath steady. Funny, you said the same thing after Kandahar province. He chuckled. And you didn't listen then either. You're not built to survive outside the machine, Drake. You're a tool that forgot it's replaceable. Her jaw tightened. Then why are you afraid of me? A pause. Then his voice changed. Because tools don't talk, and you've been talking too much. Static cracked, then another explosion tore the night apart. Harlan grabbed her arm. We need to move. She nodded, blood streaking down her sleeve. They disappeared into the dunes under the rising dawn, the sound of helicopters growing faint behind them. Hours later, the sun rose over an empty desert. The attackers were gone. The air was quiet again. Saren and Harlan collapsed behind a ridge, exhausted, dehydrated, alive by inches. She tore a strip from her shirt and tied it around her shoulder. The bleeding had slowed, but her strength was fading. Harlan looked at her. You saved us again. She gave a faint smile. Don't get used to it. He laughed once tiredly. You realize they'll never stop, right? You just declared war on the people who built you. I know. Then why keep going? She looked up at the blazing sun, her face calm. Because I've spent my life taking orders from men who called murder a mission, she said quietly. Now I'm writing my own. Harlan studied her for a long time, the woman who'd gone from ghost to reckoning, standing on the edge of her own extinction. What's next? He asked. She met his eyes. We take this to the one place they can't silence. Where that? The people. Her tone was steady, resolute, final. He nodded slowly. Then we do it your way. The wind picked up, carrying the first taste of the coming storm. In the distance, a single hawk circled in the heat haze, silent, patient, unbothered by the war below. Saren watched it for a long moment. Funny, she said softly. Everyone thinks the predator makes noise, but it's the quiet ones that kill cleanest. She shouldered her rifle and started walking. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, harsh, merciless, free. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't following orders. She was leading them. Why did truth always feel heavier than a rifle? Saren Drake stared at the cracked laptop screen, the desert wind whispering through the abandoned outpost they'd taken shelter in. The air smelled of old sand and metal. The power came from a stolen generator humming unevenly outside. The sun was sinking low, painting the dunes in bruised amber light. Commander Derek Harlan sat across from her, his face lined with exhaustion, his shirt streaked with sweat and dust. They'd been running for 4 days across borders, through dead airfields and half-buried towns, hunted by men who once called them allies. Now all that stood between them and the full weight of a global cover-up was a signal they hadn't yet sent. Saren's fingers hovered above the keyboard. The encrypted files glowed faintly on the screen. Every name, every payment, every falsified mission report, enough to shatter careers, governments, even the illusion of honor. And yet she hesitated. Once I hit send, she said quietly, there's no going back. They'll bury us under the same dirt we're trying to dig up. Harlan leaned back against the wall, running a hand over his face. They're already trying. This just makes the whole worth it. She gave a faint, humorless smile. That's one way to put it. He studied her for a long moment. What's stopping you? She looked down at the blinking cursor, the desert light flickering across her gray eyes. Maybe it's the thought that, for the first time, I'm not following orders. I'm not executing someone else's plan. I'm the one pulling the trigger this time, and I don't know if I can live with what happens after. Harlan's voice softened. You've lived with worse. Yeah, she said, but this time the casualties might not be enemies. He didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. The silence between them was filled with the whine of the wind and the steady click of cooling metal from the generator. Then she closed the laptop. Not yet, she said. We need a clean signal, one they can't trace or jam. Harlan frowned. Where do we find that? She looked toward the horizon, where the sand turned to black rock. Somewhere they're not watching, somewhere the world forgot. They left before dawn, moving through the cool half-light when the desert still slept. By mid-morning, they'd reached the remnants of an old colonial relay station carved into a cliff. Half the structure was buried in sand, the other half standing like the bones of some dead creature. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient cables, the floor littered with rusted transmitters. It was perfect, dead enough to be invisible, high enough to catch a signal. Saren powered up the transmitter, rerouting it through a secure satellite network only Black Ops teams used, the same system that had once carried their orders. Now it would carry their defiance. Harlan kept watch at the entrance, scanning the horizon through binoculars. The silence stretched for miles, broken only by the moan of wind through metal beams. "You know," he said, "when I first joined, I thought serving meant protecting the system." Saren didn't look up from the console, and now I think the system's just the battlefield. It's the people who matter. She met his gaze briefly, something unspoken passing between them. "You really think this will change anything?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maybe not, but maybe it'll make the next person think twice before pulling a trigger for the wrong reason." Her hands moved with quiet purpose, the transmitter coming to life in a slow hum. "Signal's clean," she said. "Once it's uploaded, every major journalist, every oversight committee, every intelligence watchdog gets the data simultaneously. They can't stop it all." "Good," Harlan said. "Then let's do it." She hovered over the command. Her pulse was steady, her breath even, the same rhythm she'd mastered behind a rifle. "3," she whispered. "2. 1. She hit send. The progress bar filled in silence. When it reached 100%, Saren exhaled. For the first time in years, the weight she'd carried began to lift, not gone, but shared. "It's done," she said softly. Harlan smiled faintly. "You just declared war on half the government." "No," she said, "I just told the truth." The celebration lasted maybe 10 minutes. Then the ground began to tremble. Harlan froze, listening. "That's not wind." Saren turned off the transmitter, grabbed her rifle, and peered through the crack in the doorway. Dust rose on the horizon, fast, deliberate. Vehicles. "How the hell did they find us?" Harlan muttered. "They didn't," she said grimly. "They tracked the signal." A second later, bullets shattered the quiet. The cliffside erupted with gunfire. "Down!" They hit the floor as rounds punched through the old concrete, spraying dust and sparks. The entire station shuddered under the impact. Saren crawled to the far window, returning fire in sharp, precise bursts. 2 targets went down. Another took cover behind a truck. Harlan reloaded. "Looks like a full assault team." "Davenport." She nodded. "Who else?" "Can we run?" "Nowhere to go," she said. "We hold until they stop breathing." The fight was chaos, dust, heat, the crack of rifles echoing through the stone. Saren moved like she'd done it 1,000 times, calm, efficient, detached. Every shot meant something. Every movement was deliberate. When her clip emptied, Harlan tossed her another mag without a word. They worked together like gears in a machine built for survival. Then the radio crackled. "Drake," a voice said, smooth, cold, familiar. "Cole Davenport. You never did learn when to quit." Saren grabbed the radio, her voice steady. "And you never learned how to win without lying." He laughed. "You really think you've accomplished anything? By morning the story will be buried, the evidence deleted, and you'll be a ghost again, a traitor, officially dead for real this time." "Maybe," she said, "but I'll die telling the truth. You'll die hiding from it." "Don't flatter yourself. You're not a hero, Drake. You're a malfunction." She smirked. "Then I guess you built me right." Gunfire erupted again. The radio went silent. Outside, the sound of engines roared closer. Saren looked at Harlan. "They're going to breach." He nodded, gripping his sidearm. "Then we make it hurt." When the explosion came, it blew the front of the station apart. Concrete and fire rained down. Saren was thrown backward, her shoulders slamming into the wall, her vision blurred. Shapes moved through the smoke, armored, efficient, silent. One of them raised his weapon. Then a single shot cracked through the dust, and he dropped. Harlan had taken him from 10 meters with a pistol shot that would have made any sniper proud. But the others were already closing in. Saren rolled, grabbed her rifle and returned fire, 2 more down, then another. She was bleeding again, side wound, deep but not fatal. Her breath came ragged, the air thick with grit and smoke. Harlan crouched beside her, firing blind toward the breach. "We're not getting out of this one, are we?" he said between shots. She smiled faintly, even through the pain. "Maybe that's never been the point." He laughed once, sharp, tired, real. Outside, the roar of engines grew louder. Helicopters. "They brought air support," Harlan said. Saren leaned against the wall, reloading. "Then we make it count." She rose, aimed through the broken frame, and fired one perfect round. A rotor assembly screamed. The chopper veered sideways and crashed in a bloom of fire. The explosion lit the night sky. For a moment, everything stopped, the air shimmering in the heat, the noise fading into ringing silence. Then came the voice again, through the smoke. "Enough." Cole Davenport stepped into view, his rifle hanging casually from his shoulder, his expression unreadable. He walked forward through the haze like a man on a stage built from ruin. "I told them you were dangerous," he said. "They didn't listen. They thought you were controllable." Saren lowered her weapon slightly. "And what do you think?" He smiled. "I think you're perfect right up until now." Harlan aimed at him. "You move, you die." Davenport raised his hands. "Relax, Commander. I'm not here for you, I'm here for her." He looked at Saren. "They'll erase you either way, Drake, but if you come back in quietly, we can make it painless. No records, no headlines, just silence." She studied him. The man who'd built her, betrayed her, and still thought he owned her. Then she said softly, "You mistake silence for peace." Her finger tightened on the trigger. One shot. Davenport staggered, a perfect red bloom spreading across his chest. He looked down at it almost curiously, as if he'd expected it. Then he fell. The desert went quiet. Only the wind remained. When the smoke cleared, Saren dropped to her knees, exhausted. Her hands shook for the first time in years. Harlan knelt beside her, checking her wound. "You're bleeding bad." "Not the first time," she whispered. He pressed harder, voice breaking. "Stay with me." But she was already fatting, not from blood loss, but from the weight of everything that had led here. "Harlan," she said softly, "if they come back, if they try to bury it, don't stop fighting. Promise me." He nodded, his throat tight. "I promise." She smiled faintly. "Good, because someone has to remember why we started this." Her eyes fluttered, closed for a second, then opened again, steady, focused. "Help me up," she said. He hesitated. "You can't." "Help me." He did. She stood, shaky but unbroken, staring out at the burning wreckage below. The storm clouds were rolling in now, black, heavy, alive. "Looks like rain," Harlan murmured. "Maybe it's just washing the blood off," she said. Then quietly, almost to herself, "Truth doesn't die, it waits." She slung her rifle, tightened the strap on her wound, and began walking into the storm. Harlan followed. Behind them, the fire climbed higher, painting the desert in light. In the distance, faintly, came the low thrum of more helicopters, reinforcements, too late to matter. The wind howled, carrying her voice away. But for a brief moment, it sounded almost like a prayer. For the living to stay alive. Why do legends always end in silence? The rain came 2 days later. Real rain, heavy, cold, unrelenting. It turned the desert dust into rivers of red mud and washed the smoke from the sky. By then, Saren Drake and Commander Harlan had made it across the border. They moved through a string of small villages, trading weapons for fuel, fuel for silence. The world had already begun to shift under their feet, because the truth had found its way out. Every major news network had the files. Every oversight body, every whistleblower forum, every independent journalist, all flooded with proof of corruption, covert funding, and orchestrated conflicts. The machine had been exposed. But it wasn't victory. It was chaos. In Washington, heads rolled. Names disappeared from rosters overnight. The networks ran stories for weeks, then stopped when the pressure grew too dangerous. Half the truth reached the surface, the other half drowned beneath national security. Still, it was enough. Enough to make people ask questions, enough to remind them that silence was a choice. And somewhere in that chaos, Saren Drake vanished again. Harlan sat alone in a safe house on the coast of Morocco, watching the rain slide down the glass. The news played low on an old television. Commentary, denials, congressional hearings that meant nothing. They were all pretending this was about oversight, not guilt. He turned it off. The world wasn't ready for her story. It never would be. A knock came at the door, 3 short taps. He froze, then slowly he opened it. A courier stood there, soaked to the bone. "Delivery," he said in French, handing over a sealed envelope. Harlan took it, shut the door, and slid it open. Inside was a small data card and a folded piece of paper. On the paper, written in sharp, neat handwriting, were 4 words. "For the living, SD." He closed his eyes. Relief, grief, pride, all tangled in one breath. She was alive. And still fighting. A week later, a new video surfaced online. Anonymous upload, no metadata, no traceable source. Just a single figure standing against a gray horizon, face half hidden by shadow, voice distorted. It was Saren Drake. Her tone was calm, measured, deliberate, the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You don't need to know my name," she said. "You just need to remember what they tried to hide. For years, we believed we were fighting for something pure. Honor, duty, country. But honor without truth is just obedience in uniform. They taught us to pull the trigger without asking who built the gun." She paused, the wind howling softly through the microphone. "They'll call me traitor, terrorist, ghost. But I'm none of those. I'm a reminder that silence is the enemy we all serve if we do nothing." The feed cut off after that. Within hours, it had been taken down from every major platform. But copies spread faster than any government could erase. Her words lived on screens, phones, memory drives, whispered between soldiers who'd seen too much and citizens who finally wanted to know more. Saren Drake had become what she was never allowed to be, visible. Months passed. The war didn't stop. Corruption didn't vanish. But something subtle shifted, a fracture in the machine's perfect order. A handful of soldiers resigned rather than carry out questionable orders. A journalist who'd once buried stories began publishing names. A senator stood up in a hearing and said, for the first time, "We were lied to." And somewhere out there, on the edge of every story, was her shadow, a rumor, a name said softly by those who still believed in something better. Harlan followed those rumors like breadcrumbs. Somalia, Turkey, the Balkans. Everywhere he went, he found the same traces: small missions no agency claimed, corrupt shipments intercepted, civilians extracted from kill zones before they burned. No medals, no signatures, just the same mark carved into stone or metal, a small circle with 2 lines crossing through it. Her old insignia, Cipher 7. She was still out there. Then one night, in a rain-slick alleyway in Dubrovnik, he saw her. It wasn't planned. He was following a lead, and she was following a trail, 2 ghosts colliding in the same storm. She stepped out of the shadows wearing civilian clothes, a hood pulled over her face. But the eyes, those gray, unblinking eyes, gave her away instantly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Harlan said quietly, "I thought you were done fighting." Her expression softened just enough to show something human. "You don't stop fighting, Commander. You just change what you're fighting for." He took a step closer. "You could have called." She shook her head. "They still watch you. They'll always watch you." He sighed. "You did it, you know. The leak changed things." "Not enough," she said. "Maybe not, but it started something." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years he saw peace behind her eyes. Not comfort, not safety, but peace. "I'm proud of you," he said. Her smile was faint, fleeting. "You were the only one who ever saw me." The rain ran down her hood as she turned to leave. "Drake," he said. She stopped, half-turned. "What now?" he asked. Her answer was soft, almost lost to the rain. "Now I go where the silence is loudest." And then she was gone. Weeks later, a small boat was found drifting near the coast of Montenegro. No name, no ID, just a rifle, a sealed data case, and a dog tag etched with 3 words. "For the living." No body. No trail. Some said she'd gone dark again, working under a new name. Some said the agency finally caught her. Others swore she'd become something larger, an idea no bullet could kill. No one ever proved which was true. But in forward bases across the world, her story lived on. In whispered conversations during night watch. In the quiet of armories where young soldiers cleaned their rifles and wondered what they were really fighting for. In the hearts of those who'd seen the difference between loyalty and conscience. They called her the operator who turned on the system, the woman who shot the truth back. But most of them just called her Drake. Years later, in a quiet veterans' hospital outside Arlington, Derek Harlan sat in the courtyard, his hair gray, his leg bound in an old brace. He watched the younger soldiers pass, new faces, new uniforms, same ghosts behind their eyes. A young corporal approached him, holding a folded piece of paper. "Sir," she said, "this came for you, no sender listed." He took it, hands trembling slightly. Inside was a photograph, black and white, grainy, taken from what looked like a village in Myanmar. A woman stood among children, helping rebuild a broken school, her face half-turned but unmistakable. Saran Drake. On the back, written in the same sharp handwriting, were 4 words. Still fighting, still alive. Harlan smiled. His eyes glistened in the fading light. He folded the photo carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Then he whispered to the empty air, as if she could still hear him. "You were right, Drake. Dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The wind picked up soft, warm, carrying the faint echo of thunder from the east. And for a moment, just a moment, he thought he heard her voice again. Calm, certain, free. For the living to stay alive. Sometimes the bravest act isn't pulling the trigger. It's choosing what's worth aiming for.